So, welcome to a new week of operating system deployment best practices. Our first solution is going to be adjusted to allow a little more time for us to set up access to the new virtual system platform. What we've done is pushed back that solution, and we'll go ahead and use some features and some functionality in our Module 2 solution. Inside Module 1, you'll find something that you can work on your own system. And there are some advantages to learning how to do this with your own personal technology. And let's enlarge this so it's a little easier to read. So there's a walkthrough. It's a PDF that explains everything you need to do to complete the Module 1 solution. And I've extended the deadline so that by the time we start class on Wednesday, you should be completely finished. The goal is to take advantage of the initial work you've done in the My Campus portal with Microsoft Downloads. And if you already have the activation keys for each of those, you'll use the standard edition to install a virtual machine on your own laptop. Essentially, what you'll do is download the install image after you work some steps to prepare your own personal technology. If you've been in a class with me last semester, you may have actually done some of these things already, and you know that if you've had any kind of practice, it gets easier and quicker with each round. Essentially, you're going to install and set up VirtualBox with the extension pack. And the version that you want to install is version 7.0.4. Are there any questions so far?
None from me.
Okay. So to install VirtualBox, I'm going to walk through this very quickly. You open up a browser and type in VirtualBox and the word download. And from a Google prompt, it'll open up this screen. You'll notice that there's a new version, 7.0.6. So I'll actually go ahead and click on this and download it because the version that I have is 7.0.4. And that is why the instruction for the assignment reads the way it does. It says 7.0.4 or higher. So this may have been released recently, like over the weekend. So if you go ahead and download this, essentially it won't take very long as you have a decent internet connection. And you also want to download the extension pack, this part of it right here. And the extension pack is what translates your local hardware into virtual hardware that other operating systems can talk to. So you'll click all supported platforms, and that will download as well. There are times where it's a good idea to uninstall the previous version of VirtualBox So I'm going to do that. If I go to my start menu and start typing control panel, and then go into control panel on your screen, it may look like this. What you want to do is select so it shows large icons. You'll go to programs and features. You'll find VirtualBox and you'll uninstall. A little pop-up will ask if you really want to do it and you'll say yes. Should happen pretty quickly.
Quick question, Professor.
Yes.
Is VirtualBox more stable now? I remember last semester,
Yes.
a lot of problems.
Yeah, that's a fair question. That's a very fair question. VirtualBox is more stable now, and they have worked some kinks out. So I go to my downloads folder. One of the keys to a clean installation for VirtualBox is after you've uninstalled the old version, you want to select the new version, right click it, and then choose run as administrator. Does everybody see this?
Yeah.
Okay. Running as it'll pop up and say, are you sure you want to do this? And you say yes. And that'll make quick work of this. As soon as 7.0.6 is installed, accept the defaults, say yes. There might be a little hiccup while we're viewing if it disrupts my network right now. Our screen share might pause a moment for my voice. But
All right.
it says start Oracle after installation. I'm going to uncheck the box and say finish. Now, why didn't I want to start it? Well, I have the extension pack 7.0.6. So I'm going to, once you install VirtualBox, the icon will change and you'll see a green cube here. Now, because this is packaged differently, you can't right click it and run it as an administrator, but you can just double click it. And what that should do is open up VirtualBox and then say, oh, do you want to replace the old version, meaning the extension pack, with the new version? That's a nice confirmation that this is actually happening the way it's expected. I'll scroll down to the bottom of the license agreement, the end user license agreement, or EULA, as it's commonly referred to. I'll say, yes, I accept. And then it'll load VirtualBox. And in order to fulfill your portion of section 2, you basically show a picture of VirtualBox installed and then provide, so you can take a screenshot of VirtualBox open. If you do, it might be a good idea to open up the help screen and then open up about. So it shows the version number. You can drag your mouse over it like I did. And that's the artifact you need to include for VirtualBox. And then this is almost a bonus because you should have the other piece of this already. It says copy and save the license keys for standard and data center. Wasn't that part of your previous?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, there it is. So,
Quick question.
yes.
Would it be okay if I installed VirtualBox on my D drive instead of my C drive? Does it matter?
Well, actually, that's an excellent question. And if your drive, let's take a look at this. Let's say that you have a PC and the other drive has more room. You can certainly choose the D drive. But there is a trick when you install it to the D drive. And I wanted, if you want, I can walk through that now real quick because
Sure.
it can get a little sticky. So I'm going to go ahead and uninstall this. If I refresh this again, go back to programs and features, I see 7.0.6. I'm actually going to uninstall this again, and it's going to get terribly confused. So there's a default path that it specifies on the C drive. And
Program files.
yeah, and what happens is that if people choose a different path, it tends to lock on to the drive letter D without replicating the path with it. So then VirtualBox installs into the root of the D drive, and it gets kind of messy. Now that may not be the case here, but what I'd like to do is demonstrate the workaround. So I have this, and I'm going to install it again. Run as administrator, enter yes. It'll say next. Okay, so everybody sees this, yeah?
Yep, yep.
What we want to do is substitute program files, Oracle, VirtualBox. All we want to substitute is the C drive. So here's usually what I do. And if you click browse, it gives you a chance to copy the entire path. And what I'd like to do is substitute drive letter D for that, and then just copy that and put it in a notepad for now. Because ultimately, VirtualBox expects to see a directory called Oracle and then a parent directory called program files. And that's just how the code is written. So I think you're going to have a better result as opposed to a case where it's just like this. Okay. So if you were to install it to the D drive, what you'll do is work back up to here and then get to your D drive. Now, I happen to have some, you notice I happen to have some software installed on my D drive.
Yeah, yeah.
So it may prompt you to create a folder called program files. It may prompt you to create another folder called Oracle, or you may be able to paste it all in there, but ultimately you want to load it to the D drive. And what's really cool is I intended to use my D drive for applications, and I forgot about it completely when I was in a hurry. So actually your suggestion is helping me out here because I want to use my D drive for data and applications, and then my E drive for virtual machines on my laptop. So I'm going to go ahead with this. I'm going to go into program files and then into Oracle and then VirtualBox. And now it reads D, right? So it'll do the same thing. Good question. Any other questions about that second part of our solution? So before you use the install media in the My Campus portal, so now if you hadn't already, you can download the software image from the My Campus portal. And you can download the image from either the standard or the data center edition screen. Does everybody understand what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I remember from the assignment.
Yeah. So what we want you to do this time, though, is to create a separate VM directory And if you don't have an extra drive to do it, then you're going to put it on the C drive. Now, in my case, I'll demonstrate a little differently. So I'm going to create in here, I don't have a VM folder. I don't want my virtual machines installed here, although last season, these are older virtual machines from last year. So I'm leaving those. I want to create a separate, and see, that's what I did last year when I was demonstrating this. I'm going to go into my, the drive that I'd like to set up for my virtual machines. And if you only have one drive, then do it on your C drive. But you'll create the a folder explicitly for virtual machines. And it's also a good idea to create a separate one. If you'd like to do this for extra credit, you can create a VHD folder as well. I know it's not written in here, but you can do that. I'll do that for both in my virtual machines drive. I'll right click and create a new folder or directory, and I'll call one VM. Whoops, got ahead of me there. I'll call the other one VHD. And I often like to put my virtual hard disk and my virtual machine in two different directories. Now, once again, the VHD folder is optional. I'm going to point my VirtualBox application to use these folders by default. So that's another extra thing I can do here. And that's kind of cool. I'll go ahead and finish this. If I go to machine preferences, file preferences, can everybody see where I am right now?
Yeah.
So for the default machine folder, I don't want to park this on my C drive users directory where my login profile is located, because if I have anything going on with OneDrive synchronization, it's going to want to create a virtual machine in the cloud, and that's horrible. So I'll click the pull down and use other, and then scroll down and choose this, and then this, and I'll select the VHD. I'll select the VM folder. So it'll read my drive and then VM. Now, if you don't have another drive letter, then, and all you have is a drive letter C, then that's fine. It'll say C:\VM. And that's what you want. It's also a pretty cool thing to do to create the virtual hard disk in advance or ahead of time in the VHD folder, and then name it after your machine, and then point to it when you're creating the machine. But those extras, well, let's see. Yeah, let's do that. Let's go ahead and do that. I should have, I don't know if I have my ISO downloaded. Let's look. I have an extra copy of the install media already downloaded on another disk. So I'm going to start the process just to demonstrate it. And then I'll show the rest. I will also go ahead and simulate the creation of this machine using another install media. But yeah, that's what I'll do. It's a good idea to go ahead and create the new virtual machine hard disk before you actually build out the new one. Maybe with any luck here, I can get that install media fresh, and it doesn't take that long if I'm connected in the classroom on Buck's Wi-Fi. So let's see how fast we can make this happen. Now, this again. So every now and then it forgets its way, and I have to put in this, and it says, oh, I'm taking you to your organization page. I put in my 900 number. I don't want to show this again, and I don't want to stay signed in. That should be your answer every single time. Because otherwise, when your passwords change, your browser may not update all the passwords. Is everybody with me? This looks familiar, yes? This is kind of a review of what we were doing last week.
Yeah, it's the assignment basically.
Yep. So instead of using the, I've already got the key. I'm going to go ahead and click download. And okay. So that's going to take a while, but we'll go ahead and use another install. I'll use another install media to simulate the build of this thing. Or better yet, I'll record a separate video for the rest of the process. That's what we'll do. And I'll leave this running. So I'll post a separate how to build your virtual machine, and I'll post a link for it inside here and inside the Blackboard. But essentially what you'll do is go ahead and create this virtual machine, and then use your key to activate it. And you'll have a standard Windows 2022 server running on your laptop. Now, there is a fifth step where you clear the default account and then complete the updates, and that's just a best practice. The default account that's built when you install the media, use the media to install the server, usually uses what name? Would anyone care to guess?
Admin.
Yeah, administrator.
Yeah,
thank you.
administrator or admin. And that's a terrible nuisance. If you're in any of my cybersecurity classes, this is called the first account exposure. That's my name for it. It creates a new account for the first user of a brand new install, and it always has root privileges, and people have a tendency to just run right out onto the internet with it and start doing whatever they need to do. And it's a bad habit. It's a best practice to rename the default account or delete it. If you can delete it, that's better. But if you can't, then you rename it and you disable it, and then create another appropriate account to use while you're online, and a different account to conduct maintenance with. So sometimes you can't delete the account, but if you rename it to something that isn't as obvious, like maintenance or support or other, something that isn't so obvious, then you create a second account to use while you're online doing email and other things. You only use the administrative account, and you never leave it admin or administrator, and you only connect with it when you're performing essential maintenance. So that is just a value added kind of thing. Now, if you're interested, you can pick up additional points by enhancing the security of your new server even more. You can disable NetBIOS over TCP/IP. And there is a command prompt way to do that by issuing a command from an administrator command prompt. And this is the command right here. You can actually copy and paste that right in the way it is. Another quick way to do it in the GUI is to go here. I'll show you right now. If you go inside the properties, I'll go this way. Inside control panel, if instead of going to programs and features, you go to network and sharing center, and you go to change adapter settings, find the Ethernet card for your virtual machine. It'll say Ethernet. What you can do is disable the IPv6, double click into here, select advanced, go to the WinS tab, and disable NetBIOS over TCP/IP. That's what you're doing. By default, it's enabled, and that's another automatic thing that's set up so that Windows servers just work. And it's a nuisance because hackers can basically see the systems on your network without too much trouble. So you would click OK, and then OK, and then OK. And from there, that's what would happen. On the server, the virtual machine, it'll be the Ethernet interface. Any questions about the solution? Wonder if this thing's actually, let's see how, thought I'd check to see if this download is coming along. Oh, there it is. Yeah, there's still some stuff that has to happen yet. We'll record the additional steps for the rest of the tasks you have to do when you're setting up. Right now, what we'd like to do is pick up some more content in our study guide and push on. Are there any questions about our solution alternative and the tasks that you'll take?
No questions.
Okay. All right. So in our study guide, we got to the point where we were talking about versions of or editions of operating systems. I think that had to do with E. And we were talking about how certain flavors, you can categorize the types of operating systems by whether they are built intentionally for client machines, meaning individual PCs or laptops or devices versus servers. And then we talked about how Microsoft wants their one size of operating system to fit everything. One size fits all. So they want to emphasize extensibility in their operating system design, which means all you have to do is check a box. And now the server you just set up is an email server, or it's a file server, or it's a DNS server, or it's an Active Directory domain controller. So you can set up an entire Fortune 500 company or a government agency, and everybody has a centralized password and login. The convenience factor, we talked about how Apple focuses on that, and efficiency is really the realm of Linux. And we did make a mention of the 80-20 rule, yes?
Yeah.
Okay. So can anybody recall the toolbox analogy? Could anyone repeat that?
Yeah, is that you use 20% of your tools, and you
How
basically
often do you use the 20% of the tools?
80% of the time.
80% of the time, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So Microsoft used to have in older versions, so the versions for server operating systems with Windows are stated by the year. And this has been updated. So the first time they came out with a server edition, they came out with 2000, and then they came out with 2003. 2 years later, they came out with a 2003 release 2. Whenever you see an R2 with a version, it means that, I mean, what you can do is say, okay, add 2 years. So this is like server 2005. Does everybody understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So they came out with a second release of 2003, but for marketing reasons, they didn't want to come out with a 2005 because they started to get a lot of pushback from sysadmins who said, I'm not going to buy a new version every 2 years. You're nuts, right? I'm not going to pay a new license. Remember that Microsoft charges for all of their versions, right? So in 2008, they came out with a new release, a new version. When we say version, a new version, we mean an entire replacement of the kernel. The operating system kernel is completely redesigned. Whenever you see R2, you can add 2 more years to the original date. So 2008 R2 came out, when would you guess?
I guess 2010.
Yeah, 2010. So release 2 of 2003 came out in late 2005, early 2006. And then 2 years later, they had a 2008. And they had 2 years later, they had a 2008 R2, which was like, you could have said, well, this is server 2010. And they had a 2012. Then 2 years later, they came out with 2012 R2. Around what year do you think that was released? 2014.
14.
Yep, 2014. And then 2016 was a big change. There were a lot of important changes starting with 2016. And then they almost came out with an R2 and they held off and they said, okay, yeah, let's get away from all that R2 stuff. And it took them a year longer and they came out with 2019. So now there's 3 years between. 3 years later, they came out with 2022. So essentially what you see are basically 2-year cycles for most of the time. That's the version of the operating system. Now, additions of the version include standard server. In the 2008 version, they had a huge range of different editions. You could get standard edition core, you could get data center edition and data center core. There was a nano version. They've discontinued nano. So basically there's all manner of different versions and releases. And then down here, there should be a table, yeah, or a list, right? So everybody sees foundation and then standard. So this is like a light version, then a standard version, then an enterprise version, then a data center version. And they had specialized hardware called Itanium. It was supposed to be a very high powered kind of thing. They actually came out with a separate version of Windows for Itanium. Small business server edition, essential business server, things got really nuts. And they started to confuse people. So if you fast forward to today and get all the way down to 2022, there's only 2 versions in 2022. And that is significant because 2008 marks that point of insanity where they just started to differentiate everything. I think they kind of woke up and said, oh, wait a minute. You know what? We wanted to sell one size fits all. It goes all the way back to this again. So they started getting criticized. They started confusing all of their customers. And they said, wait a minute. Oh, I'm sorry, we lost our minds a little bit. That's about the same time that they had a change of management too. There was a new president at Microsoft. So just coincidentally, during that time frame. And they kind of got back to simple things. Once they got to 2016, they boiled it down to just essentials, standard, and data center. And by the time they got to 2019, it's just standard and just data center. Now, each of those additions, standard and data center, come out, have a GUI and CLI only version. And what's really important to understand is that when you're installing it, you used to be able to convert so that you could work only in the command line, or you could add a GUI. Once we got to the later versions of server, if you pick wrong, you're stuck with it. So when we got to 2019 and 2022, basically the rule is, okay, you have standard, you have data center. You can have one with a GUI, or you can install it without the graphical user interface. It's called the desktop experience. So when you're installing it, if you use the standard key, it'll say, do you want standard or do you want standard with desktop experience? You want to pick the second one if you want to work with a graphical user environment. If you want a smaller footprint and you want it to be more secure, you choose the first one, but you have to know everything on the command line. And it's just good to keep all that straight. The early versions of that CLI environment were called core, meaning, yeah, it's just the functions and not the GUI, and you have to know the command line. So whenever you see the word core, that's a reference to Microsoft Server installation without a GUI, no desktop experience. Any questions about versions versus editions? Remember, versions for Microsoft has to do with the number, and in this case, the number of the year. It's also true for the desktop. Windows 7, Windows 8, Windows 9, Windows 10. But then, yeah, after a point, they started releasing whole new versions of the operating system without changing the number. It's called a feature. It's a feature release, right? Does anyone know what I'm talking about in Windows 10 and 11?
No.
So in Windows 2010, let's go back here. They started getting into trouble with Apple. So there was a 2020 version of Windows 10. There was actually a 2018 version and a 2016 version. And then there was a 2021 version and a 2022 version. So they're called feature releases. And whenever you see that there's a new feature release, that's not the same as a cumulative update. It is a complete replacement of the operating system kernel. And sometimes they'll add a lot of new features. So even though it's Windows 10 and people are still running Windows 10, it came out in 2016. And the last feature release was 2022. So they had new versions of Windows 10, and you had to understand the different releases. So So that was pretty crazy. When you go to the Mac world in the Mac OS, those all have numbers and names also. So Mac OS X releases, version history. So the versions are named after cats or after famous landmarks or parks. So in the early days of the Mac OS, they were all named after cats like cheetah, puma, jaguar, panther, tiger, leopard, snow leopard, lion, mountain lion. And then all of a sudden they decided to change, right? So here you know the actual version or the kernel version here shows the version of the kernel. And then you can actually see the reference to this. So now that we're in Ventura, right, that's considered a 13. So while they were talking about, all of these were version 10 up till Mountain Lion. And then after that, they started naming them completely different, like Yosemite, El Capitan, Sierra, High Sierra, Mojave. These are all Catalina. These are all California like landmarks. Ventura is the last one. So it's just important to understand that there's usually a number and a name associated with most operating system releases. But the versions also come out in different editions. So you can have like a desktop edition versus a server edition. And at one point, the Mac OS actually had a server version of their operating system as well. And it was good to run that on a Mac Pro, but not like a Mac Mini, because a Mac Mini had limited hardware. We'll go ahead and pick up in our class on Wednesday about client server roles. That's an important concept, and we want to spend some time to develop that. We'll also extend our existing timeline for deadlines this week. So we'll try to finish up our review of content by this Friday and give everyone a chance to take their first whack at the module assessment. Please go ahead and get started with your install media download. And that way, if you run into any snags between now and the start of class on Wednesday, you can shoot me a note and we can share a screen.